Welcome to the world of The Lost Boys, a movie that redefined vampires, the 80s, and cult cinema forever. This wasn't just another horror flick, it was a wild mix of style, music, and mythology that shaped a generation. Behind the leather jackets, motorcycle rides, and fangs, there are stories that most fans have never heard. From hidden set secrets to career-changing performances, every detail helped build its lasting legend. Today, we're counting down 20 fascinating facts you probably didn't know about the Lost Boys. Fact 1. A kid's movie that grew fangs. When most people think of the Lost Boys, they picture leather jackets, motorcycles, and dangerous teen vampires stalking the boardwalk. But the project didn't start that way at all. In fact, the very first draft was meant to be a children's film, something closer to the Goonies than gothic horror. The main characters were written as 11 and 12-year-olds, armed not with motorcycles and bloodlust, but with flashlights, tree houses, and childhood bravery. Even the vampires were nothing like the slick, youthful predators we remember. They were envisioned as wrinkled, Nosferatu-like creatures, old and creepy instead of seductive. Richard Donner, who had directed The Goonies, was originally set to take the helm. But when Donner left to focus on Lethal Weapon, the script sat in limbo. Enter Joel Schumacher. When he read the screenplay, he decided to completely transform it. He aged the kids into teenagers, swapped out innocence for sexuality, and injected danger, style, and a slick gothic edge. What started as a whimsical children's adventure suddenly became a haunting story about temptation, identity, and power. The coming-of-age fairy tale was gone, replaced by a film that would forever change how vampire movies were made. Fact 2. The flying trick that wasn't really flying. One of the most chilling and unforgettable aspects of The Lost Boys is the way the vampires stalk their prey from the air. You see rooftops from a dizzying angle, you hear the whooshing wind, and victims suddenly get ripped from the ground. Yet in a clever twist, the audience never actually sees a vampire fly. There are no wings, no bodies dangling from wires, no elaborate CGI sequences, just the camera itself taking the role of predator. This wasn't an artistic decision at first. It was a financial necessity. The production simply couldn't afford high-end visual effects or wire rigs that would convincingly show full flight. Instead, the filmmakers turned the limitation into a strength. By letting the camera glide forward as though it were the vampire's point of view, the audience was left to fill in the blanks. The result was far scarier than any special effect. We never saw the creatures in motion, but we felt them. That absence of visibility tapped into primal fear. What you can't see is often more terrifying than what you can. Ironically, a cost-cutting measure ended up creating one of the most iconic stylistic signatures of the film. Fact 3. Kiefer Sutherland's silent domination. Kiefer Sutherland wasn't meant to be the central figure of the Lost Boys. His role as David was written as part of the vampire gang. Not the star, not the lead, not even the character with the most lines. But the moment he appeared on screen, everything changed. With spiked platinum hair, a leather trench coat, and an icy stare that said more than any dialogue ever could, Sutherland commanded attention. He didn't approach the character like a traditional monster. Instead, he treated David as if he were a rock star. Quiet, stylish, and lethally controlled, his presence electrified the film. Director Joel Schumacher and the editors noticed it immediately. Sutherland was given more close-ups, more screen time, and even a stronger ending. By the time the film wrapped, David had become the face of the movie, his glare plastered across posters and promotional art. What's even more remarkable is that Sutherland achieved this dominance without ever raising his voice or delivering over-the-top theatrics. He built his menace in stillness, in silence, in the intensity of his gaze. In many ways, his performance defined The Lost Boys and elevated it from teen horror to timeless cult classic. Fact 4. Jason Patric almost walked away. When Jason Patric was first offered the role of Michael, he wanted nothing to do with it. To him, the script felt messy, too strange, and far too focused on teenage melodrama. Patrick, who was pursuing serious dramatic roles, didn't see much appeal in vampires, fog machines, and rock and roll aesthetics. He initially turned it down flat, but Joel Schumacher wasn't ready to lose him. Schumacher explained that The Lost Boys wasn't just about vampires. It was about transformation, family, seduction, and identity. It was at its core a story about how power can corrupt and how desire can consume. That pitch won Patrick over, and he reluctantly agreed. Even then, while filming, he doubted whether the movie would work. He didn't fully get it until he sat in a packed theater and watched the audience scream, laugh, and cheer in all the right moments. In hindsight, Patrick has admitted that he almost made a career-altering mistake by walking away. The Lost Boys became a defining moment in his filmography, his first true cult classic, and a role that fans still celebrate decades later. What he once dismissed became a cornerstone of his career. Fact 5. The real chaos of Santa Cruz Nights. Unlike many Hollywood productions that build elaborate sets to control every detail, The Lost Boys chose authenticity. The crew filmed on location at Santa Cruz's real boardwalk, and the background wasn't made of carefully selected extras. The crowds we see in the film were a mixture of locals, drifters, runaways, and late-night thrill-seekers who actually haunted the boardwalk. That decision gave the film an atmosphere of raw energy, but it also created real dangers. Cast and crew were warned to guard their wallets carefully, as thefts weren't uncommon. Fights broke out between takes, and some of the shady-looking people wandering through the background weren't acting. They were genuinely dangerous. This blending of reality and fiction heightened the eerie tone of the movie. The vampires were make-believe, but the boardwalk itself was crawling with unpredictability. Joel Schumacher leaned into that chaos, capturing it in the background and using it to fuel the film's sense of unease. By choosing not to sanitize the setting, The Lost Boys blurred the line between its supernatural horrors and the real dangers lurking in Santa Cruz at night. It wasn't just a movie set, it was a trap disguised as a playground. Fact 6. The Frog Brothers' Unexpected Comedy. Corey Feldman and Jameson Newlander brought to life Edgar and Alan Frog, the eccentric vampire hunting brothers who worked at the comic book shop. Originally, their roles were meant to be minor, a quirky duo offering exposition and little more. But Feldman, already a star from The Goonies and Stand By Me, had a flair for improvisation. Joel Schumacher encouraged him to play the role as if he were channeling a grizzled Vietnam veteran trapped in a teenager's body. Feldman took that note seriously, lowering his voice, exaggerating his seriousness, and delivering lines with military precision. The result was hilarious. What could have been throwaway characters turned into audience favorites. The brothers became the comic relief in a movie drenched in Gothic style, balancing its darker themes with humor. In fact, the Frog Brothers became so popular that they later inspired spin-offs in comics and sequels. Feldman especially became synonymous with the role, reprising Edgar Frog decades later. The irony is that this fan-favorite duo wasn't carefully designed. They were shaped by a young actor leaning into absurdity and a director who knew comedy could heighten, not weaken, the horror. Without them, The Lost Boys might have felt too heavy. Fact 7. Corey Haim's heartbeat in the story. While The Lost Boys is remembered for its slick vampires and edgy style, Corey Haim's portrayal of Sam Emerson is what grounded the movie emotionally. At just 15 years old, Haim gave the film its heart. Unlike the other characters, who were caught up in temptation, rebellion, and darkness, Sam remained pure, funny, and relatable. His wide-eyed reactions gave the audience a way into the story. He was the lens through which the bizarre world of Santa Carla unfolded. Joel Schumacher understood Haim's value and gave him room to shine, even encouraging his natural humor and charisma. Behind the scenes, Haim bonded deeply with his castmates, particularly Corey Feldman, marking the beginning of the two Coreys phenomenon that would dominate teen culture in the late 80s. Haim's style, his colorful clothes, his fearless energy, made Sam stand out in every scene. He wasn't just Michael's kid brother, he was the glue holding the family together as everything around them descended into chaos. Many fans argued that without Haim's balance of innocence and bravery, The Lost Boys might have tipped too far into darkness. Instead, his performance gave it charm, levity, and timeless relatability. Fact 8. A soundtrack that bit into pop culture. The Lost Boys soundtrack wasn't just an accessory, It was part of the film's soul. In an era when soundtracks were beginning to drive sales and pop charts, Joel Schumacher knew music could elevate his vampire story into a cultural moment. Tracks like Echo and the Bunnymen's cover of People Are Strange and Iron XS with Jimmy Barnes's Good Times gave the movie a pulse that matched its rebellious energy. But the standout was Cry Little Sister by Gerard McMahon. Though it wasn't a chart topper at the time, it became the film's anthem, haunting and hypnotic, with lyrics that perfectly reflected the movie's themes of family, temptation, and darkness. The music didn't just play in the background, it shaped the atmosphere of every scene, making the boardwalk feel alive, dangerous, and seductive. Over time, the soundtrack gained cult status, selling millions and inspiring countless covers. For many fans, hearing Cry Little Sister instantly transports them back to the smoky boardwalk lights and vampire battles of Santa Carla. The soundtrack proved that music could define a film just as much as visuals, cementing The Lost Boys not only as a movie, but as a cultural vibe. Fact 9. The infamous saxophone scene. Ask any fan of The Lost Boys and they'll mention the unforgettable image of a shirtless, oiled-up Tim Capello wailing on a saxophone during the beach concert scene. At first glance, it seems bizarre. What does a gyrating saxophonist have to do with vampires? But Joel Schumacher had a vision. In the 1980s, music culture was larger than life, and Schumacher wanted the boardwalk party to feel surreal, sweaty, and unforgettable. Hiring Capello, who had been Tina Turner's touring saxophonist, was the key. With his chains, muscles, and theatrical performance, Capello embodied the excess and raw energy of the decade. Though critics scratched their heads, audiences never forgot it. The scene became one of the most parodied and beloved moments of the film, turning into a meme decades later. For many, it's the perfect symbol of the Lost Boys, over the top, stylish, and a little bit absurd. Capello himself embraced the fame, performing the song at conventions and events years later. What was once a strange creative gamble turned into one of the most iconic cult images in cinema. The sax man didn't just play a song, he played himself into vampire movie history. Fact 10. The true villain in disguise. Throughout The Lost Boys, the vampires feel like the obvious threat, but the real twist comes in the form of Max, the seemingly gentle video store owner dating Lucy Emerson. Played by Edward Herrmann, Max was written to appear as the kind, fatherly figure, someone who could provide stability to the fractured Emerson family. But beneath the charm and politeness, Max was the true villain all along, the head vampire orchestrating everything. The reveal shocked audiences because Max was consistently portrayed as harmless, even awkward. His scenes were filled with subtle clues, dogs growling at him, his odd insistence on being invited into the Emerson home. But most viewers missed them on first watch. The twist redefined the movie's message. Evil didn't just lurk in the shadows, dressed in leather with fangs and motorcycles. It could smile at you, offer you a job, or ask your mother out on a date. Harriman's performance made Max chilling because he wasn't a monster in appearance. He was a predator hiding in plain sight. It was a clever subversion of horror tropes, making The Lost Boys not only thrilling, but also psychologically unsettling. Fact 11. Santa Carla, a character of its own. While The Lost Boys was filmed in Santa Cruz, the movie renamed the town Santa Carla and turned it into a Gothic playground. The real Santa Cruz boardwalk was a vibrant tourist spot, but Joel Schumacher reshaped it into something darker. Neon-soaked, filled with punks, fire dancers, and an unsettling sense of danger. From the very first scene, when the camera swoops over the boardwalk, the town feels alive. But it's not just a backdrop, it's a character. The film's tagline, "Sleep all day, party all night, never grow old, never die," wasn't just about vampires. It captured Santa Carla itself, a place where youth culture thrived, but shadows always lingered. The choice to rebrand Santa Cruz as Santa Carla wasn't random either. In the early 70s, Santa Cruz was nicknamed the murder capital of the world due to a string of serial killings. That reputation gave Schumacher's fictional version a haunting authenticity. By mixing real danger with stylized horror, the town became the perfect vampire nest. To this day, fans visit the Santa Cruz Boardwalk, instantly picturing leather-clad vampires stalking through the night. Santa Carla wasn't just a setting. It was the Lost Boys' beating, bloody heart. Fact 12. Joel Schumacher's unique vision. Joel Schumacher didn't invent the idea of the Lost Boys, but he completely reinvented it. The original script was meant to be a lighter, almost Goonies-style story, focusing on childlike vampires and young adventurers. When Schumacher came on board, he thought the idea needed more danger, more style, and a lot more edge. He aged up the characters into teenagers, added a sexy, rebellious tone, and transformed the story into a gothic fantasy about temptation and eternal youth. Schumacher's background in fashion and design heavily influenced the look of the film. Leather jackets, flowing coats, wild hairstyles, and a mix of glam rock with punk attitude. He wanted the vampires to feel like a rock band you'd follow into the night, dangerous but irresistible. He also leaned into MTV-style editing, making the movie feel fast, stylish, and modern for its time. Many directors would have treated the story as campy, but Schumacher balanced it with sincerity and visual flair. His vision turned what could have been a forgettable teen horror into a cult classic that still feels stylish decades later. Without Schumacher's fingerprints, The Lost Boys would have been just another vampire movie, not a cultural milestone. Fact 13. The birth of the two Coreys. Before The Lost Boys, Corey Feldman and Corey Haim were rising teen stars in Hollywood. Feldman had already made his mark in Stand By Me and The Goonies, while Haim broke through with Lucas. But it was this film that brought them together for the first time. Their chemistry, Haim as the quirky younger brother and Feldman as the over-the-top vampire hunter, resonated with audiences. What began as a casting coincidence soon turned into a cultural phenomenon. Fans loved seeing the Coreys side by side, both on screen and off. Hollywood capitalized on it, pairing them in a string of movies afterward, including License to Drive and Dream a Little Dream. They became teen icons of the late 80s, appearing in magazines, interviews, and even reality shows years later. But their partnership wasn't just business, it was personal. The two formed a close, sometimes turbulent friendship that lasted for decades. The Lost Boys didn't just give horror fans a cult classic, it sparked the beginning of an era. The two Coreys became a brand, a symbol of teenage rebellion, and a bittersweet chapter in Hollywood history forever linked back to Santa Carla. Fact 14. Vampires reinvented for the 80s. Before The Lost Boys, vampires in film often stuck to tradition, aristocratic, mysterious, and rooted in Gothic castles. Joel Schumacher shattered that mold. His vampires weren't old-world lords. They were leather-wearing, motorcycle-riding rebels who looked like they could have stepped out of a rock concert. Kiefer Sutherland's David, with his peroxide blonde hair and sinister smirk, set the tone. These weren't creatures hiding in shadows. They flaunted their youth, their power, and their danger. The film injected punk and glam aesthetics into vampire lore, making them cool, sexy, and terrifying at the same time. This reinvention influenced countless vampire stories that followed, from Buffy the Vampire Slayer to Twilight. Even the idea of vampires as a metaphor for eternal adolescence gained traction here. The boardwalk setting, the stylish wardrobe, and the rock-driven soundtrack turned bloodsuckers into icons of youth culture. Suddenly, vampires weren't just monsters. They were lifestyle symbols. The Lost Boys made it cool to root for the dark side, even while fearing it. It wasn't the first vampire movie, but it redefined the genre for a new generation, ensuring its bite lasted long after the credits rolled. Fact 15. Michael versus David, the eternal struggle. At its core, The Lost Boys is more than just a stylish vampire flick. It's a story about choices, family, and identity. And no dynamic captured that better than the rivalry between Michael, played by Jason Patric, and David, played by Kiefer Sutherland. Michael, the newcomer trying to protect his family, represented innocence and loyalty. David, the charismatic leader of the vampire gang, embodied temptation, rebellion, and power. Their conflict wasn't just physical, it was symbolic. Every time Michael edged closer to David's world, he risked losing himself, his brother, and his humanity. Jason Patric played Michael with brooding intensity, while Kiefer Sutherland leaned into David's menacing charm, making him one of the most iconic villains of the decade. Their motorcycle chases, tense standoffs, and final showdown in the vampire lair gave the film its pulse. Fans still debate who stole the spotlight, but there's no denying that Michael and David's clash became the backbone of the movie. Without their magnetic push and pull, The Lost Boys would have lacked its emotional and dramatic center. It wasn't just a fight against vampires, it was a battle for the soul of youth. Fact 16. The soundtrack that defined a generation. One of the reasons The Lost Boys became a cultural icon was its soundtrack. Music wasn't just background noise, it was the movie's heartbeat. Tracks like Cry Little Sister by Gerard McMahon became instantly tied to the film's gothic, rebellious atmosphere. The Echo and the Bunnymen cover of The Doors' People Are Strange gave the boardwalk scenes a surreal, alien vibe. And of course, Lou Gramm's Lost in the Shadows amped up the film's youthful energy. Joel Schumacher had a sharp sense of how music could elevate visuals, and the result was a soundtrack that felt as important as the cast. For many fans, the music is inseparable from the movie itself. Hearing Cry Little Sister immediately brings back visions of vampires soaring across the night sky. The soundtrack also captured the cultural mix of the 80s, part gothic, part rock, part pop, all blended into something timeless. It sold well, gained its own following, and influenced how future horror films integrated music. Today, the Lost Boys soundtrack is considered one of the best in horror history. It wasn't just about fangs and blood, it was about sound, mood, and the feeling of being young, wild, and untouchable. Fact 17. Kiefer Sutherland's star-making role. Kiefer Sutherland had already appeared in films like Stand By Me, but it was The Lost Boys that turned him into a full-fledged star. As David, the peroxide-haired vampire leader, he brought a perfect blend of charm, menace, and rock and roll energy. His screen presence was magnetic. Every smirk, every glare, every line delivery made him both terrifying and irresistible. Interestingly, David wasn't even supposed to be the main villain. Originally, he was written as just one of the gang, but Sutherland's performance was so strong that he naturally rose to become the film's centerpiece antagonist. His rivalry with Jason Patric's Michael elevated the story into something more than just teen horror. It became a battle of wills, temptation, and leadership. Critics and fans alike singled him out as the standout of the movie, and Hollywood took notice. In the years following, Sutherland's career skyrocketed with roles in Young Guns, Flatliners, and eventually his career-defining role in 24. But for many fans, David remains his most iconic role. The image of Kiefer, fangs bared, whispering, "You'll never grow old, Michael. You'll never die," is seared into pop culture forever. Fact 18. The Frog Brothers, comic relief meets heroism. While The Lost Boys had its share of dark, brooding characters, it also gave us one of horror's funniest duos, the Frog Brothers, played by Corey Feldman and Jameson Newlander. These self-proclaimed vampire hunters ran a comic book shop by day and claimed to fight the undead by night. At first, they seemed ridiculous, paranoid teens obsessed with vampire lore. But as the movie unfolded, their bravery and determination proved crucial in saving the day. Corey Feldman, inspired by action heroes like Stallone and Schwarzenegger, played Edgar Frog with a hilariously exaggerated tough guy voice, while Newlander balanced him out with a slightly more grounded approach. Together, they gave the movie its comic relief, but also some of its most memorable lines and moments. Fans loved them so much that they returned in later sequels, keeping the spirit of the Lost Boys alive. The Frog Brothers represented the ultimate fantasy for 80s kids, geeky outsiders who got to become real-life heroes. Their blend of humor and courage made them stand out in a film full of stylish vampires, and to this day, they remain cult favorite characters beloved by fans of the franchise. Fact 19. Practical effects over CGI. Unlike modern vampire films that rely heavily on CGI, The Lost Boys embraced practical effects, and it's one of the reasons the movie still looks so good today. The makeup team, led by Greg Canham, who later won Oscars for Mrs. Doubtfire and Bram Stoker's Dracula, created the vampire's iconic look. feral faces with glowing eyes and terrifying fangs. The transformations were achieved with prosthetics, contact lenses, and clever lighting, giving the characters a menacing edge without losing their rock star glamour. The flying sequences used wirework and creative camera angles rather than digital trickery. Blood effects, explosions, and even the fiery finale in the vampire lair were done practically, giving every scene a tangible, visceral weight. Schumacher understood that practical effects not only looked better, but also aged better. Watching today, the film doesn't feel dated in the way many CGI-heavy movies from later decades do. Instead, it feels gritty, real, and immediate. That commitment to practical craft is part of what makes The Lost Boys timeless. Every fang, every drop of blood, every fiery crash feels authentic, because it was, and that authenticity keeps the scares alive decades later. Fact 20. A cult legacy that never died. When The Lost Boys first released in 1987, it wasn't immediately recognized as the cultural juggernaut it would become. Critics were mixed. Some loved the style and energy, while others dismissed it as teen fluff. But over time, it grew into one of the most beloved cult classics in horror history. Fans kept the legend alive through conventions, screenings, fan clubs, and pilgrimages to the Santa Cruz boardwalk. The movie spawned sequels, comic books, and endless homages in pop culture. Its influence is undeniable. You can see echoes of it in everything from Buffy the Vampire Slayer to Twilight. The themes of youth, rebellion, and the seductive pull of eternal adolescence never lost their relevance. Even decades later, new generations discover the movie and find it just as electrifying as audiences did in the 80s. That's the magic of The Lost Boys. It captured a moment in time, but it also tapped into something universal. Its mix of horror, humor, music, and style keeps it alive in pop culture. In the end, the film lived up to its promise. Never growing old, never dying, always cool. And there you have it. 20 facts that prove The Lost Boys wasn't just a movie, it was a movement. With its unforgettable soundtrack, iconic cast, and perfect blend of humor and horror, it earned a place in pop culture history that refuses to fade. Decades later, it's still as stylish, creepy, and cool as the night it premiered. So which fact surprised you the most? Drop your thoughts below and don't forget, just like the film's tagline promised, you'll never grow old and you'll never die if you believe in the Lost Boys.